What if the last thing a man said before he died wasn't a confession, but a curse? Imagine death row in absolute silence, breath held, everyone's eyes fixed on a detail no one dares comment on. An envelope. White, sealed, delivered with hands that were already cold, as if death had come before the execution. That letter should never have reached his hands. The phrase still echoes in the corridors as if engraved on the concrete walls. The condemned man didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply stared at the priest with a look that seemed to pierce his soul and whispered, "Burn after reading." This moment, so fleeting it could have gone unnoticed, became an abyss. Because everything that happens in the final seconds before the execution carries a weight no one can ignore. Now take a deep breath. Can you imagine the scene? The metallic clang of chains, the creak of the iron door, the clock ticking down to the last hour. Have you ever wondered what a killer feels when he knows there's no more time? What someone writes when their pen is the only weapon they have left? The priest received the letter. He held it tightly as if holding a forbidden secret. Witnesses say his eyes trembled, as if he felt the weight of something that shouldn't be there. But before anyone could discover its contents, the envelope vanished. It wasn't in the prison archives. It wasn't with the priest. It wasn't among the convict's belongings. It vanished as if swallowed by the very silence of the cell. What you're about to discover may surprise you. Because letters like this, hidden, forbidden, carry more than words. They carry intentions. They carry truths that perhaps should never see the light of day. And this is where the real mystery begins. What could be so devastating that it needs to be erased from history? Perhaps a confession to crimes that never came to light. Perhaps a dirty secret about his own imprisonment. Or perhaps just the final psychological game of someone who refused to lose control, even in the face of death. Which of these possibilities scares you the most? Have you ever been there? Finding something you shouldn't have seen? Feeling the weight of information that seems too dangerous to share? This is the kind of dilemma that turns a simple letter into a collective obsession. Guards swear the priest kept the envelope in his pocket. Others say the prison administration immediately confiscated everything. Some even believe the letter never existed, and that the story was invented by the convict himself to leave a trail of doubt. But think with me, if it were just a lie, why would so many people risk swearing otherwise? What was there inside that would justify the disappearance? It is at this point that criminology ceases to be mere analysis and becomes psychological theater. Because the condemned know that their last words may be eternal. And they also know that fear is the only legacy they can leave. This is the break no one expected. A forbidden letter, a silent priest, and an entire prison held hostage by a secret that may never be revealed. It's a shadow play between faith and crime, between death and what remains after it. And here's the psychological twist. What if this letter still exists? What if it's hidden in some forgotten archive, waiting for the right moment to resurface? What would you do if you had access to it? Read it to the end? Or burn it without ever knowing? From here on, every detail will become more disturbing. Every fragment will take us deeper. Because this story isn't just about an envelope. It's about what it represents: power, manipulation, and the chasm between guilt and redemption. And maybe, just maybe, the disappearance of this letter is not the end but just the beginning. He wasn't just any man. He wasn't just another name on the list of executed men who, over time, became cold statistics in official reports. The prisoner who delivered the letter to the priest carried on his back a biography of blood and silence. His face was marked, scars scattered as if each one were a forcibly engraved memory, and a gaze that seemed to never settle on anything, as if he were forever trapped between the past and the void. They say he had already accepted death long before he was sentenced. That inside his cell, while others screamed, banged on the bars, or begged for visits, he wrote. He wrote in the early hours of the morning when the prison fell asleep, and tore up the pages soon after, as if training for that final moment. Some guards claimed they saw small, burned pieces of paper on the corner of his bed, as if he were testing phrases, rehearsing words, slowly constructing the enigma he would leave behind. But what was most striking wasn't his coldness. It was the way he treated every detail of death row as part of a ritual. The condemned man seemed to understand something no one else did. That execution wasn't the end, but the opportunity to plant a doubt that would outlive his body. This perverse and calculated mindset made him not just a prisoner, but the author of his own legend. The forbidden letter became the culmination of this psychological game. It wasn't just a piece of paper with scribbles on it. It was the transformation of a simple gesture into a symbolic bomb, capable of lasting decades and still making us uncomfortable. Because within it, there was the promise of a hidden truth. And what destroys the human mind more than knowing there's something hidden, something that could change everything, but has been ripped from everyone's sight? Behind the scenes at the prison, the story spread like wildfire. Some claimed the letter contained the location of bodies never found. Others believed it exposed schemes within the prison, corruption, information trafficking, perhaps even the involvement of religious authorities. These are theories that arise when silence is filled with fear. And the cruelest detail, no one could deny it because there was no evidence, only fragments. The priest who received the letter never spoke publicly about it. Records show that years later he suffered nervous breakdowns, taking periods away from his religious duties. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps the impact of what he read was so great that it eroded his faith from within. It's curious to consider the weight of the decisions made at that moment. On one side, a condemned man with nothing left to lose. On the other, a priest, trained to hear confessions and keep secrets in the sanctuary of silence. But what happens when that secret doesn't concern the salvation of the soul, but rather crimes that could change entire investigations? Where does spiritual duty end and human responsibility begin? This is the wound that never heals. Because every time we talk about this letter, we also talk about choices. About the fine line between protecting or revealing, between obeying or defying. And at the center of this tension is the figure of the prisoner, who seems to have calculated every move to make everyone uncomfortable. What would you do if you held such a secret in your hands? Would you keep it to the end? Or would you reveal it even knowing it could destroy reputations and upend entire histories? Some argue that the letter's very disappearance was part of the plan. That it was never meant to be read by everyone, merely to serve as a shadow, as psychological poison. A disembodied document, yet powerful enough to haunt. A revelation that remains unseen. And this is where criminology finds its most disturbing side. It's not just about crimes or punishments, but about manipulation. How a man at the edge of his life managed to control the narrative even after his death. The power wasn't in the execution, nor in the newspapers of the time. It was in the mystery. In the empty space he left. Understand the impact of this. A convict who became the author of his own immortality. He knew that, deep down, death is forgotten too quickly. But a doubt? This one spreads, grows, becomes a legend. Perhaps this was the true confession, not in explicit words, but in the psychological game of creating an invisible scar in the collective memory. To this day, researchers, curious people, and experts alike try to reconstruct what might have been in that letter. Fragments of testimony, rumors from guards, notes erased from archives. But what remains most evident is the feeling that we'll never know for sure. And that's precisely what captures our attention. Because the human brain can't stand emptiness. It needs to fill gaps, even if it's with theories. Have you ever felt this? The need to discover something that seems to slip through your fingers? Like finding an old diary with pages torn out, or a confession cut in half. The emptiness speaks louder than any words. And it is in this emptiness that this letter remains alive. And perhaps most disturbing is the idea that someone still possesses it. That it's tucked away in some forgotten drawer, among yellowed papers, waiting for the right moment to be opened. Or worse, that it's already been read, but no one has dared to reveal what was written. In this case, the letter has already served its purpose, not as a document but as a curse. Every detail of this story points to something greater than the simple disappearance of an envelope. What we are witnessing is a power play. Between faith and crime. Between silence and revelation. Between the last chance for redemption and the choice to leave a trail of fear. And each time we revisit this mystery, we get a little closer not to the answer, but to the mind of its creator. Because perhaps the truth never lies in the words that were written, but in the impact of knowing they existed. And that's exactly where the darkness thickens. Because if the forbidden letter is gone, what else could be hiding in the shadows of death row? There's something almost ritualistic about a condemned man's final minutes. As if every word spoken in that moment carries the weight of an entire life compressed into a final sentence. It's no wonder many choose priests or pastors as their final confidants. Therein lies the promise of listening, of forgiveness, of absolute silence. And for those about to cross the threshold from life to death, the thought of being heard can be more valuable than salvation itself. But have you noticed how this choice reveals a specific mindset? When a killer decides to confide his secret to a priest, he's not just asking for spiritual absolution. Often he's constructing a narrative. An intimate theater in which he still has control over the plot, even if only for a few seconds. It's a strategic decision, almost as if the final confession were his last weapon. In real cases, this is evident. There are records of prisoners who, moments before execution, revealed the location of bodies that the police had been searching for decades. Others, in contrast, used the moment to deny everything, as if to transform death into a stage for eternal doubt. The impact of these final words permeates not only the justice system, but also the victims' families who are often torn between belief and distrust. After all, what is more valuable, the silence of a lifetime or a revelation made amidst the sound of the clock striking the final hour? And it is at this point that the priest's presence becomes so disturbing, because he is not just a witness. He is the guardian of secrets that can never be confirmed. The sacrament of confession binds him to silence, but this silence becomes a kind of parallel prison. Imagine forever carrying words that could change investigations, that could offer closure to families who have waited a lifetime for answers. This is transformation in its cruelest sense. The transformation of an ordinary man into a human safe, locked from the inside. Behind-the-scenes prison scenes reveal how this relationship between faith and crime generates invisible tensions. Guards have reported instances when priests emerged from the execution chamber visibly shaken, as if they had seen something they shouldn't have seen. Some never returned to their parishes. Others plunged into personal crises that shook their very faith. And here the question arises, to what extent can these men bear the hidden truth they carry? Every final confession is also a decision. A decision to reveal or conceal, to try to ease one's conscience or to continue manipulating until one's last breath. Some confess to seek a belated redemption, but there are also those who use this moment to hurt, to leave an open wound in those who listen. This is the case of murderers who, before their execution, look directly at their victims' families and choose words that are not of forgiveness, but of venom. Words that transform the pain into something even deeper, as if to ensure that their death would not end the story. This psychological game shows that last words are never simple. They are constructed, thought out, charged with intention. And the priest or pastor becomes part of this macabre theater whether he likes it or not. He is forced to play a role he didn't ask for, that of carrying a truth that cannot be spoken. It's as if he were condemned along with the prisoner, but his cell is invisible, made of silence and memories. When we return to the forbidden letter that disappeared, its weight becomes even more evident. It wasn't just an envelope. It was the embodiment of everything the prisoner couldn't shout in public. The priest became the vehicle for a message that perhaps wasn't meant to be shared with anyone but him. And that changes everything. Because if oral confession is already unbearable, imagine a written confession, with every word carefully chosen, every phrase charged with the intention of lingering even after the body is buried. This is the impact few people understand. Behind the scenes of executions, there's a silence that speaks louder than the screams. A silence laden with revelations that never reach the surface. And that's why last words have so much power, because they're not just words. They're emotional bombshells, final decisions, calculated manipulations. They're hidden truths, often buried along with the bodies, but which continue to echo like ghosts in the minds of those who heard them. And perhaps the cruelest detail is realizing that, for some of the condemned, there is no redemption, no regret. There is only the desire to leave their mark. To transform their death into a spectacle, to shape their narrative like a collective scar. The missing letter is just one example of this. A symbol of the human capacity to use even the last seconds of life as a stage to create mysteries. And when we think about this, we begin to understand that execution is not an end, but the beginning of another prison. A psychological prison that imprisons everyone who came into contact with those words. Priests, guards, families, even us who tell the story today. Because the void they leave never closes. And it's in this emptiness that everything becomes more dangerous. Because every time we remember those last words, those hidden confessions, we begin to question not only what was said, but what can never be revealed. If you felt the weight of this story, noticed every silence and shadow the letter left, then know that this is just the beginning. Every detail you saw today is a half-open door to even deeper secrets, truths that insist on being hidden, and fragments no one wants revealed. And that's precisely why it's important for you to subscribe. Not out of obligation, but to ensure you stay here with me, exploring these layers of mystery and impact, without missing anything that's yet to come. When you subscribe, you become part of this space. It's not just a click, it's a choice to be present, to follow every revelation, every echo of the past, every shadow that crosses the corridors of the human mind. It's your way of connecting with what truly matters. The stories that challenge, that disturb, that leave their mark. And the truth is, these narratives would be nothing without those who follow them to the end. Each inscription strengthens this path, each attentive look becomes part of the silent investigation, and together we can continue to uncover what lies between the lines, behind the scenes, and in the dark corners most prefer to ignore. So, if you want to follow me, discover what the letter could never fully reveal, and feel every detail of the impact it left, click to subscribe. Because the story isn't over yet, and the next secret is waiting to be revealed, precisely for those who have the courage to stay. The moment of delivery wasn't just a mechanical gesture of meeting hands. It was almost a performance, a choreography studied down to the smallest detail. The condemned man raised his eyes and fixed them on the priest with an intensity that only exists when there's no tomorrow. There were no tears, no tremors. Only a dense silence that seemed to permeate the prison walls. The letter was folded with obsessive precision, as if each crease were a calculated choice. As he handed over the envelope, it wasn't weakness that spoke, but a strange strength, an almost cruel conviction. And the phrase, spoken without hesitation, echoed like a sentence: "Read alone, and never tell." The atmosphere on death row grew heavier than usual. Experienced guards, men trained to endure the worst, realized there was something different about the scene. This wasn't just another criminal in his final minutes. This was someone who knew he still had power. Who understood that a letter could carry more weight than the execution itself. This strategic mindset transformed the environment into a stage for one final spectacle. And the priest, without asking, was forced to be the silent protagonist. The cinematic detail is almost impossible to erase from memory, the condemned man holding the envelope as if it were a gun, but a gun that doesn't fire bullets, it fires revelations. The letter became a symbol of a psychological game in which the impact isn't measured in blood, but in secrets. He didn't cry, he didn't plead, he didn't beg for forgiveness. He gave orders. It was the ultimate role reversal. The man about to die dictating rules to the representative of the faith. Have you ever stopped to think about what might be written in an envelope like this? What could be so dangerous that it's forbidden even to whisper? The hidden truth may not just be a confession of crimes, but a confession of systems, of pacts, of behind-the-scenes dealings that should never come to light. It's at this point that doubt becomes unbearable because we're no longer talking about just one isolated killer, but perhaps entire networks hiding behind masks. The priest, upon receiving that paper, not only gained a responsibility, he gained an invisible prison. From that moment on, any decision would become a personal sentence. Open the letter? Break the pact of trust? Remain silent and bear the weight of something that could transform lives? This dilemma reveals what is most human, the choices we make when we are alone in the face of what no one else can see. It is at this point that the topic ceases to be just about crime and becomes about ourselves, about how we deal with secrets that could reconfigure reality. And perhaps that's precisely why you need to pay close attention to every detail of this story. Because this isn't just about a convict and a priest. It's about the impact certain truths have when they emerge at the wrong time. Stay with me until the end, because what you'll discover isn't just a grim account of imprisonment, it's a dive into decisions that could very well have been ours, into choices that show the lengths a human being will go to maintain control of their own narrative. Behind the scenes at executions, there are reports of priests who could never sleep peacefully after hearing a confession. But here, there was something beyond words. There was a physical record, tangible proof of something that could not be erased with a dying breath. This difference changes everything. Because words can be forgotten, distorted, denied. But writing remains, transcends time, can be found years later, and with it, the impact is renewed, as if the condemned man had returned to life only to repeat his final gesture. And what's most frightening is realizing that the condemned man knew this. He chose the letter precisely because he understood its weight. It was his final decision, to transform the confession into something that could survive his own death. This reveals a cold, calculating mindset, someone who sees beyond execution. Not as an end, but as an opportunity to leave a scar that never heals. The entire prison seemed to breathe more slowly that night. The priest held the envelope as if it were burning, but he didn't dare let it fall. The condemned man just stared at it, as if certain he'd planted an invisible bomb in another man's heart. The order, read alone, and never tell, echoed not as a plea but as a veiled threat. And this threat permeated the air, contaminating even those unaware of the note's existence. What could be inside? A revelation about the crime? The names of accomplices who were never discovered? A confession that would change everyone's view of the victim? Or perhaps something even more disturbing? A secret that had nothing to do with the crime, but with the system itself, with the dark corridors where decisions are made hidden from the eyes of the world. With every second the envelope remained sealed, the suspense grew like a shadow that never ceased to expand. There was no more death, no more imprisonment. There was only that paper, folded and sealed, carrying a hidden truth that could explode at any moment. And that's where the story deepens even further, because understanding the weight of that letter isn't just about understanding a condemned man's gesture. It's about understanding the human need to leave something behind, even when all seems lost. It's about realizing that, in his final minutes, a man can still find ways to manipulate, to turn his farewell into a spectacle, to force everyone around him to forever carry the echo of his final decisions. And the most disturbing thing is that, even now, no one knows for sure what was done with that letter. What's most haunting about this episode is that the letter was never officially recorded in the prison archives. It appears only in fragmented accounts, in whispers among retired guards, and in the memoirs of religious figures who have served on death row. The lack of formal evidence only fuels the suspicion that its contents could not be revealed without directly impacting structures much larger than the life of a single convict. This is where forbidden theories emerge, those that no one wants to acknowledge out loud, but which continue to survive behind the scenes, growing in the darkness. Some believe the envelope contained confessions to other never-before-revealed crimes, murders, or disappearances that still haunt families to this day. If this hypothesis were true, it would mean that a man about to die decided to become the sole key to unlocking truths buried for decades. But at the same time, the question arises: if the confession truly contained such relevant information, why was it never brought to light? Was it out of fear of repercussions, or because the recipient of the note decided to protect something more valuable than the truth itself? Another, even more disturbing theory is that the letter wasn't about past crimes, but about the system that kept him imprisoned. It was a denunciation of authorities, corruption among guards, evidence manipulation, political decisions disguised as justice. In this case, the condemned man would have used his final moments not to clear his conscience, but to leave a silent bomb that would expose the rotten heart of the institution that executed him. The psychological toll of this gesture would be devastating. Imagine the transformation in collective thinking if it came to light that those who enforce the law also shape men's destinies based on distorted truths. Such a revelation could shake more than a judicial process. It could implode trust in an entire system. But there is a third hypothesis, perhaps the most disturbing of all, that there was no secret at all. That the letter was merely a cruel game, a final manipulation by a man who always lived to dominate, control, instill fear and doubt. For this view, the condemned man didn't need to write anything relevant. It was enough to suggest that something was forbidden, something that could not be read aloud. The void became his weapon. Because, deep down, the threat of what might be written is more powerful than any concrete revelation. This mentality of control to the end fits the psychological profile of criminals who find pleasure not in the act, but in the impact it leaves on the minds of others. The curious thing is that these three hypotheses don't cancel each other out. They coexist as layers of the same narrative, like doors open to different, yet equally dark corridors. Perhaps there were real confessions. Perhaps there were accusations against powerful figures. Or perhaps there was nothing but a blank sheet of paper, a void calculated to imprison consciences for all eternity. What makes the story so disturbing is precisely the fact that we will never know for sure. The letter is made more powerful by what we don't know than by what it could have revealed. And isn't that precisely what makes certain secrets immortal? The power lies not in the truth but in its absence. It's like a projected shadow. The more we try to decipher its shape, the more we realize that what frightens us is what we cannot touch. Doubt becomes a legacy. The condemned man, perhaps without tears, perhaps without remorse, achieved what he wanted, to be remembered not for his crimes, but for the mystery he left behind. This detail forces us to look at something even deeper: how secrets become instruments of transformation. They shape mindsets, alter decisions, and reconfigure entire histories. A simple folded sheet of paper can carry the same impact as a loaded gun. Because what remains unsaid takes on monstrous proportions, greater than any explicit confession. Perhaps the priest read it. Perhaps he didn't. Perhaps he burned the paper, feeling that no human conscience should carry those words. Or perhaps he kept it silent, knowing that certain revelations could only be endured when there was no turning back. Behind the scenes, some say the priest was seen differently after that night, as if he had aged years in a few hours. The distant look in his eyes, the prolonged silence, the way he seemed to struggle with thoughts he never shared. We don't need the letter to understand that something happened inside. The body speaks what the mouth dares not confess. And it is precisely this absence that transforms the letter into a legend. Each hypothesis fuels the next, as if it were impossible to find the bottom of this well. And perhaps this is the true weapon left behind by the condemned man: the ability to keep alive ghosts that can never be exorcised. The mystery did not end with his death. On the contrary, it seems to have been born there. What was written on that paper? A hidden truth that would change everything, or simply the last laugh of someone who knew how to manipulate every last breath? The weight of that question continues to spread like poison, contaminating generations who never walked that corridor, but who now carry the same unease. And that's when we begin to realize that the execution didn't end anything. It merely paved the way for something much larger, something that would continue to gnaw silently long afterward. Because in certain stories, what grips us most isn't the answer. It's the impossibility of knowing if it ever existed. It's almost impossible to accept that, within an environment controlled to the point of obsession, a simple piece of paper could disappear without a trace. Maximum security prisons are places where even breathing seems to be catalogued, where every step is monitored, where nothing enters and nothing leaves without a record. And yet, the letter dissolved as if it had never existed. This absence isn't just a bureaucratic detail. It's an open wound that fuels the idea that something much larger was hidden there. Because documents don't evaporate. They are erased. The silence surrounding the disappearance is as disturbing as the execution itself. Guards who claimed to have seen the priest holding the envelope suddenly backed down, began denying it, or simply went silent. Others say that after that night, there was unusual activity behind the scenes. Closed doors, secret meetings, orders coming from higher levels than the prison administration itself. It's as if the letter had crossed an invisible line, migrating from the realm of crime to that of conspiracy. From that point on, it was no longer about a condemned man. It was about the forces that shape decisions, that control what can and cannot be revealed. The most common hypothesis is that the letter was collected and archived in some restricted area, inaccessible even to ordinary employees. But if so, what would justify such extensive protection? Why hide a piece of paper that, in theory, should have been merely a confession or the final musings of a dying man? The most obvious, and perhaps most uncomfortable, answer is that the content had the power to directly impact power structures. We're not just talking about individual crimes here, but about hidden truths that could shatter reputations, unmask authorities, or even expose decisions that should never have come to light. But there are those who see it differently. For some, the disappearance is proof that there was nothing. That the letter was nothing more than a staged act, a psychological ploy so well crafted that it mobilized guards, clergy, and even official records, only to ultimately yield absolutely nothing. This version, though cold, also carries its power. Because if true, it reveals the mindset of a man who weaponized nothingness, who understood the power of doubt like no one else, and who, somehow, managed to immortalize himself precisely through a document that may never have actually existed. However, the most disturbing line is the one that blends these two versions. What if the letter truly existed, but its contents were so disturbing that the best strategy was to treat it as if it were a ghost? Hide it behind locked doors, erase records, deny its presence until it became a legend. This decision, at once calculated and desperate, reveals a cruel logic. Sometimes it's not what's written that destroys, but the mere possibility that it exists. The bottom line is that the letter's absence didn't eliminate the mystery. On the contrary, it multiplied it. It went from being just a piece of paper to becoming a collective scar. A hole where all the versions, all the suspicions, all the paranoia fit. And it's in this vacuum that theories gain traction, because the more one tries to erase something, the more evident it becomes that there was something to be erased. It's as if the prison itself, in trying to control the narrative, has lost control forever. Behind the scenes, some retired employees swear they've never seen anything like it again. That case was a watershed moment for the institution, changing not only protocols but also the mindset of those who worked there. Suddenly, everyone realized they were inside a machine that could swallow anyone. If a letter could disappear under so many layers of surveillance, what else could be being manipulated without anyone noticing? This silent revelation brought about an almost invisible but devastating transformation. Guards became suspicious of each other. Priests began to question how far they could go in their loyalty to secrecy. The system, which had marketed itself as solid, began to crack from within. And perhaps this is the greatest impact of the disappearance. It exposed the fragility of an environment that had always believed itself infallible. A space where the truth, in theory, should be inescapable, but where even a single sheet of paper managed to escape. What was written inside no one knows anymore. But what was broken outside the letter, that is what was marked forever. Some say the convict knew exactly what he was doing. That his decision wasn't random, but the result of a deep understanding of how fear spreads. He didn't need the eternity of a body. He only needed a doubt planted in the heart of the institution. And he succeeded. Because, in the end, the letter is no longer in the hands of priests, nor in the prison archives. It is in our minds, replicated like an invisible scar. And when we think about it, what's most frightening isn't the absence of paper. It's the realization that perhaps there was never any intention to deliver a truth. Perhaps the intention was simply to provoke this feeling that has now persisted for decades. That something vital has been ripped from us, that there's a revelation waiting behind a door that never opens. A conspiracy that doesn't need to be proven to remain alive. And it is at this point that the letter's absence ceases to be merely a historical detail and becomes something personal. Because what's troubling is not just what was hidden, but what each of us feels when we realize the truth could be erased before our eyes. It's as if we've all experienced a similar disappearance, on a different scale, a secret never told, a word never reached, a hidden truth lost in silence. And perhaps that's why this story isn't just about the convict or the prison. It also touches us. The emptiness we carry, the feeling that certain things should have been revealed but weren't. I want to open this space here as a way to not let this silence win. I want you to write a simple but powerful sentence in the comments. Nothing disappears forever. Write this as a symbolic gesture. As if to record that, no matter how hard you try to erase it, memory always finds a way. And if you want, you can go further. Use this space as a place to vent. Express how you feel when you imagine that a letter containing revelations could simply evaporate without explanation. Your indignation, your doubt, your pain, all of it matters. You may not realize it now, but every comment helps keep this story alive. It's what keeps this channel going even against the silence they try to impose. When you write, you don't just participate, you become part of this scar that no one has been able to erase. And so it is, in this silent pact between us, that we continue to deepen. Because the letter is gone, but what it left behind still has the power to haunt us. The trail left after an imposed silence is never clean. It creeps through the corridors, sticks to the walls, and multiplies into voices that no one can silence. Some swear they saw the priest discreetly slip his hand into his pocket, as if hiding something heavier than paper. Others, with the same conviction, claim that the prison administration confiscated the letter while it was still hot with ink, as if it were dynamite ready to explode. But there are also those who go further, laughing contemptuously at the doubt. That letter never existed. It was an invention, a lie planted to keep everyone trapped in a ghost. And this is where the story stops being just about a convict and becomes about the collective mindset. What do people choose to believe when the suits fragment? The letter becomes a mirror that reveals more about the observer than about the writer. For some, it's proof that there's always a hidden truth, hidden behind the system's bars. For others, it's nothing more than manipulation, a cruel performance by a man who wanted to maintain control even after death. This divergence is, in itself, the letter's most devastating impact. It doesn't need to exist to corrode. The possibility is enough. Behind the scenes at the prison, the story grew like a plague. Guards whispered in the cafeteria, inmates invented increasingly detailed versions, and even employees who had never had direct contact with the case swore they had heard the real revelation. It was as if the institution itself had lost control of the narrative, suffocated by the shadow of a document that might never have been written. And this is the most disturbing detail. When doubt takes hold, it no longer needs proof. It becomes enough to haunt. The effect is akin to an invisible transformation. A small fissure opens in trust, and from there an avalanche is born. People begin to distrust not only the letter but everything around it. If documents can disappear, if confessions can be buried, what else might be hidden behind the walls sworn to guard justice? The weight of this realization is greater than any signature on paper. It's a reminder that secrets don't just fade, they multiply. And maybe that's why I need to tell you something now. Stay with me until the end. Because there are details of this story that only make sense when piece by piece, like a delicate construction that can't be seen at a glance. By now, you've realized how much this letter has affected everyone who touched it, or believed they touched it. But there are deeper layers, revelations that only emerge when silence is forced to its limit. If you abandon it now, you'll miss exactly where the puzzle begins to unfold. And I promise, every minute until the end will give you something in return, something that might change the way you see not only this story, but also the decisions that shape what we call truth. Because deep down, what's most frightening isn't the letter's content. It's the realization that it could have been written. And it's in this space, between the real and the imagined, that the greatest conspiracies flourish. The trail of rumors isn't just a sequence of voices, it's a network of choices, each guided by interests, fears, and guilt. Who's lying after all? The priest who remained silent? The management that never confirmed? Or the men themselves who swear they saw him, without ever having seen him in a suit? The most disturbing thing is realizing that this question may never be answered. But the feeling that the letter once breathed remains alive, as if it were just waiting for the right time to reappear. And it is at this point that the story ceases to be a distant tale and begins to knock on the listener's door, forcing them to consider, to what extent would I be capable of carrying such a secret with me? It's curious how certain words take on a life of their own. The letter that was never read, that perhaps never existed, was no longer just a piece of paper hidden behind bars or pockets. It became something greater, a psychological echo that never stopped resonating within the minds of everyone who came across the story. In criminology, there's an almost unhealthy obsession with understanding the traces a criminal leaves behind. But when it comes to the last words, what is written or whispered moments before the end, it's not just the truth that matters, it's the impact. It's the ability to continue existing even after execution, as if the silence of death were just another curtain to be crossed. The condemned man knew this. You can sense that every movement, every gesture, was calculated to keep the doubt alive. It's the mentality of control, the same one that fueled his crimes, now transposed into the abyss of farewell. And here comes a disturbing detail. For many condemned to death, their final confession is neither a plea for forgiveness nor a spiritual liberation. It's a game. A final board game in which the centerpiece is the attention of the living. The forbidden card, real or not, carries precisely this function, to be the thread that keeps his name alive, that prevents oblivion. It's the final attempt at immortality. When we think about this, it's inevitable to see the manipulation hidden in every detail. Death, which should represent closure, becomes a tool, a transformation of paper and ink into an eternal presence. It's as if the condemned man discovered he could continue to dictate the rules even without breathing, leaving the living to debate, fight, and corrode themselves inside. This is the hidden truth behind so many cases. The final message doesn't always speak to those on the outside. Often, it speaks to the criminal himself, to his need to be remembered, talked about, feared. And the cruelest thing is realizing how this works. Decades later, we're still talking about this letter, discussing hypotheses, reconstructing backstories that perhaps never happened. He won in a way, because he got what he wanted, to remain. And here's a point worth reflecting on calmly. What happens when a criminal discovers that his immortality lies not in monuments, but in the minds he manages to hijack? This mentality doesn't seek glory, it seeks permanence. It seeks to become ineradicable. It is in this game that the card rises from a mere object to a symbol. It is the perfect representation of the criminal mind that refuses to disappear, that uses doubt as a weapon, that transforms emptiness into presence. And this is no distant theory, no literary exaggeration. There are countless records of murderers who made a spectacle of their last word, who used death row not to expiate guilt, but to release revelations that changed the course of entire investigations. Some confessed to crimes that the police were never able to prove, others cruelly and calculatedly accused innocent people, plunging everyone into a labyrinth with no way out. Behind the scenes of these stories, the feeling is always the same, a profound discomfort. Because no matter how many analyses are conducted, how many legal decisions are made, what remains is doubt. And doubt, in this scenario, is the perfect poison. It's what keeps the condemned alive within the collective mind, transforming them into a specter that never leaves the cell. The forbidden letter fulfills this role perfectly. It doesn't matter if it existed, because its effect is already ingrained in every version told. And perhaps this is precisely the greatest impact. The prison, which should be a space of order and meticulous record-keeping, finds itself dominated by something immaterial, impossible to catalog. The psychological echo of the letter permeates the walls, dismantling protocols and weakening authorities. It's like a silent revelation that, even within a maximum security institution, there are still secrets that cannot be controlled. And if something so small can escape, what else might be hidden? This line of thinking leads to an even more disturbing point. The condemned man didn't just want to leave his version. He wanted to provoke an internal transformation in those who remained. He wanted to force each person to carry doubt, to mentally revisit each choice, each official truth. In the end, it's no longer about him, but about whoever reads it, whoever listens to it, whoever decides. The final message, real or invented, is a virus. A virus that spreads slowly, eroding certainties, opening cracks in convictions that seemed unshakable. That's why so many investigators and criminal psychologists treat last words as such sensitive material. Because they don't die with the speaker. They infiltrate. They become part of the collective mind. And when it comes to someone who's lived controlling, manipulating, and playing with other people's perceptions, this isn't a coincidence. it's the final calculated decision. A way to ensure that even in death, they'd still be present, pulling the invisible strings of others' minds. And it is in this realm, between the real and the symbolic, that the letter's echo continues to reverberate, forcing those who approach it to face not only the condemned man but themselves. Because deep down the letter isn't about him. It's about our inability to accept emptiness, to deal with the lack of answers. It's about how doubt shapes our beliefs, our choices, our reactions. The letter is the cruelest reflection of a truth we prefer to ignore, that sometimes absence weighs more heavily than presence. And perhaps that's why this echo never fades. Because it doesn't depend on the letter, but on the human need to fill in the blanks. And as long as this need exists, the condemned man will live on. The psychological echo that began on death row still pulses, crossing time, waiting to be heard again, as if the last word had never finished being spoken. There's something unsettling about how small fragments of words can traverse decades like shards of glass hidden in the floor of a cell. No one is sure what he actually said. Some swear they heard the priest murmur that the body would never be found because everyone looked in the wrong place. Others say it was nothing more than an invention of the guards themselves, unwitting creators of a legend that has survived better than any official document. The hidden truth dissolves into echoes, but each sentence, even unconfirmed, carries a weight that fuels the mystery even more deeply. These supposed revelations never appear in their entirety. They appear in fragments, as if someone had torn a confession into 1,000 pieces and scattered them throughout the prison corridors. And each part, no matter how small, has enough impact to reopen wounds that seemed healed. It's in these moments that one realizes how the criminal mind doesn't need evidence to manipulate. A suggestion is enough. A misplaced whisper. A decision made under the pressure of silence. It's almost as if the condemned man has understood that he doesn't need absolute truth, only fragments that sow doubt. This becomes even more intense when we remember that every unsolved mystery has the power to transform into myth. A lost phrase becomes a revelation. A pause becomes a clue. And the lack of clarity creates fertile ground where anything can flourish. In this process, crime becomes narrative, pain becomes enigma. And when this happens, it's not just justice that is weakened, but also the victim's memories, swallowed up by the spectacle of doubt. If we analyze the mindset of those behind these loose phrases, the logic is clear. To control what will be remembered. It doesn't matter if it was said exactly like that, if it was misinterpreted, or if it never existed. What matters is the impact. And impact isn't born of certainty, but of uncertainty. The phrase "you looked in the wrong place" doesn't have to be true to haunt. It already fulfills its function by creating the image of a body hidden in some inaccessible corner, perhaps still intact today, waiting to be found. Behind the scenes at the prison, stories like this multiply. Guards claim to have heard, prisoners claim to have witnessed, officers contradict themselves. Each testimony carries a different hidden truth, and together these versions form a labyrinth impossible to navigate. It is in this labyrinth that the psychological dimension of this enigma is understood. The convict didn't just leave crimes behind, he left a puzzle that no one can solve. And the most uncomfortable thing is realizing how these fragments shape not only investigations, but also personal perceptions. Researchers begin to question their own decisions. Families wonder if they buried their pain too soon. Society, in turn, finds itself divided between those who believe in manipulation and those who feel that there is, indeed, a hidden truth. The side effect of this is devastating. Doubt becomes greater than any sentence. There's an invisible force in these broken words. They don't appear in reports, they're not in official documents, but they survive in whispers, in broken memories, and informal testimonies. And this force becomes more cruel because it's impossible to combat. How can you deny something that was never recorded but continues to exist as collective memory? It's in this impossibility that the condemned still wield power. They no longer control with chains or violence, but with loose memories that cannot be erased. And perhaps the most disturbing detail is this. If a letter did indeed exist, it wasn't just paper. It was a weapon. A weapon constructed not of whole sentences, but of fragments carefully crafted to survive the test of time. A weapon that, even hidden, continues to fire inside the minds of anyone who dares revisit this story. As long as these fragments of sentences continue to circulate, the enigma never dies. Every time someone repeats, questions, or speculates, the condemned man breathes again for a moment. And this reveals something uncomfortable about all of us: how much we need answers even if they destroy us. How willing we are to carry an invisible weight just to keep alive the feeling that the truth might still be hidden somewhere. It's at this point that we realize the letter isn't just about crime. It's about our relationship with doubt, with the need for meaning, with the inability to accept silence. Because as long as fragments of truth are circulating, we will never have peace. And perhaps that's exactly what he wanted. What remains clear, even after so many years, is that the forbidden letter didn't just disappear from the paper. It hid in the gaps of time, between the lines of memory, in the silent corridors of the prison, and in every mind that dared imagine its contents. It's fascinating to see how something so small, a piece of paper, a sealed envelope, can generate a chain of impact that spans decades, transforming decisions, provoking discussions, and shaping perceptions about crime, punishment, and manipulation. Each version told, each rumor, each surviving fragment of a sentence becomes a piece of this puzzle that no one can fully piece together, and it is precisely this effect that gives the story its almost hypnotic power. The letter's absence creates a presence stronger than any evidence, because when a document disappears, it becomes myth. It transforms into something that transcends the physical. It exists in theories, in debates, in the doubts that silently throb in the minds of those trying to understand. Each contradictory testimony, each whisper from a guard, each unconfirmed account adds layers to the narrative, as if the prison itself had become a stage for a hidden truth that could never be contained. And as we reflect on this, we begin to realize the power of psychological manipulation. The condemned, even no longer present, continues to exert control, continues to transform the perception of the living, leaving invisible traces of influence. And it's impossible to ignore the transformation this causes in those who closely follow these behind-the-scenes events. Investigators, criminal psychologists, and victims' families all become part of this invisible game, shaped by doubt and the need to make sense of every fragment of information. The decisions they make, the conclusions they attempt to draw, are influenced by the echo of the letter, which serves as a constant reminder that not everything is within reason. Every rumor, every partial sentence, every behind-the-scenes account serves as a reminder that the full truth is untouchable, or perhaps intentionally hidden. The convict's mindset manifests itself, even in physical absence, as a force that continues to challenge the logic and structure of the prison. The impact of this isn't limited to the prison's internal environment. Outside, the story spreads, fueling theories, debates, and even obsessions. It's fascinating to observe how something that could be simple, a final confession, becomes a catalyst for profound discussions about morality, guilt, and the complexity of human behavior. And it's precisely in this realm that the most powerful effect of the convict's psychological echo is felt. It transforms absence into presence, doubt into dominance, and each person touched by the story involuntarily becomes part of a legacy that never ends. And here comes an essential detail that cannot go unnoticed: the human need to fill in the blanks. When fragments of truth emerge, our brains cannot resist filling in the rest, even if this leads us to illusions or dangerous interpretations. And it is precisely this vulnerability that the condemned man exploited, consciously or not, by writing or suggesting something that should never be fully known. He knew that the power of the letter lay not in what was written, but in its ability to provoke profound transformations in the minds of those who sought to understand it. The letter thus became an instrument of control that transcends death, a mechanism of influence that continues to operate silently but in devastating ways. The enigma intensifies when we consider the possibilities that can never be verified. Supposed confessions of hidden crimes, accusations against prison authorities, subtle manipulations to continue playing with fear and doubt. Each hypothesis adds layers of tension, and each layer alters the perception of the story. And yet, the letter is not the absolute focus. What makes it mesmerizing is the effect it provokes, the psychological impact it generates, the way it transforms those who try to decipher its meaning. It is the power of a partial, fragmented truth that persists, infiltrates, and leaves indelible marks. The forbidden letter is gone, yes, but what it left behind is not. Its invisible presence permeates every testimony, every memory, every theory that still lingers over that prison and over everyone directly or indirectly involved. It is the echo of a mind that refused to disappear, that transformed the silence of death into a subtle yet powerful manipulation. And now, even with the letter gone, we are forced to face its consequences, to grapple with the fragments of truth that survived, and to realize that sometimes what is never revealed can be more disturbing than any open confession. So, here's your chance to participate. What do you think the letter contained? What word, what phrase, what secret would have been powerful enough to vanish from all the archives and still leave traces in the minds of so many? Leave your opinion in the comments. Just a phrase, a word, an instinct, a symbolic gesture. Each comment becomes part of this narrative, an echo of what the letter intended to provoke, and maybe, just maybe, brings us closer to the truth that remains hidden, waiting to be discovered. Because the story, like the mind of the condemned, is not yet over. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story has moved you. Something that can't be explained but that can be felt, that mix of doubt, tension and curiosity that only cases like this can provoke. So make a simple gesture, write in the comments, "I'm with you until the end." It's your seal of presence in this enigma, a sign that you were here, felt every silence, every fragment of truth that fell by the wayside. And if every word you've read so far has sparked a hint of indignation or fascination, please leave a like. It's not just a click, it's recognition that this story deserves attention, that its impact hasn't gone unnoticed. It's also your way of connecting with others who, like you, sense there's something far beyond the surface, something that defies the rules, defies logic, that almost escapes justice in the eyes of the world. If you want to continue delving into this labyrinth of revelations and hidden truths, there's a video right here that complements exactly what we've shared today. Click and stay with me there. It will open new doors, reveal details the letter couldn't reveal, and you'll realize that even with everything you've seen, the story still holds more secrets. And truly, if each fragment of this narrative gave you goosebumps, gave you some thought, or gave you that feeling that you need to know more, subscribe. Not as an obligation but as a promise. The continuity is here and you're a part of it. Each video is another step on this path of mysteries, conspiracies, and truths that insist on hiding. So comment, like, and follow me, because the forbidden letter has disappeared, but its echo still guides us. And those who follow, those who remain, discover that sometimes the truth lies where you least expect it, waiting only for those who have the courage to see it through.